speaking, interviewing Greg Hoffman at the LGMA Qld office here in Brisbane. Today is Wednesday the 17th of July 2019, and Azazina is here from LGMA Qld, kindly recording the information so you can all have your happy listening.
Thank you.
Okay, so Greg, we've got a few basic questions just want to go through and just mainly have a conversation with you. So probably going way back in history as to how you got into local government in the first place.
Well, hi Ian and Azuna, nice to be here. My entry into local government occurred through the then Dalby Town Council in November of 1966. I just finished 4 years at boarding school in Toowoomba and didn't immediately want to go to university, so I looked for a job in Dalby, and unlike today, I managed to have 3 job offers within a week. One was the bank, one was in a farm machinery manufacturing company, which is still in Dalby, and the other was the council. Right. And my father said to me, "Son, you can't go wrong working for the council." So I took the job, and that's basically been my life's history ever since. I didn't know at the time, but both my grandfathers had been councillors. My paternal grandfather, in fact, had been an alderman on the Dalby Town Council well before I was born, and my maternal grandfather had been a councillor at the Marilla Shire at Miles. So I guess it was destined, it was in the genes somehow that I was going to end up in local government, and here I am still working in local government.
So what was the first job?
First job was as an assistant rates clerk in the rates office, and had some great learnings there, because it was at that stage, if you like, the front office, the front counter. If anyone came to council, mostly they came into the rates office. So got to understand the workings of the system at that level, but also meet the folk that engaged with local government, answering queries over the front counter and doing basic rates and record keeping, clerical, financial support work.
Right. Okay. And were you feeling career orientated then, or you just it was just a job?
Oh no, I was certainly thinking of a career, but I had 2 great leaders in the place. One was Peter Thorley, who was the then town clerk, and there was another chap called Glenn Bearton, who was the deputy town clerk. And both of them were very keen for people to learn and experience local government and potentially make careers. And in fact, Glenn Bearton ran classes for myself and I think one other young recruit at the time in local government law and management, just out of interest as opposed to necessarily a course of study. But subsequently I went on to do the study. But
was that before the certificate days, or
it was certificate days, and I think that opened my eyes to the opportunity and the potential for a career, given their enthusiasm to teach and to support people who wanted to make a career of local government.
That's good. Yeah. So, 1966. How long were you there?
Well, I left Dalby in 1971 when I went to Rockhampton. Yeah. But before leaving, this encouragement to study saw me spend a year working in council and perhaps doing this these in-house classes. But then I realised that I needed to continue further education and enrolled at the then Darling Downs Institute of Advanced Education in Toowoomba and started evening classes. So in the second year, like in 1968, started to do 2 courses. So I'd drive from Dalby to Toowoomba after work, eat and drink dinner on the way, do a 3-hour lecture and then drive home another hour.
Wow.
And did 2 subjects that year, and then the next year decided it was going to take forever doing it this way. So I decided I'd do three subjects, and into towards the end of the first semester, driving home one night, I ran off the road, went to sleep, ran off the road, and luckily just damaged the car a bit, but not me.
Oh, good.
And at that point, Peter Thorley, who was the town clerk, said, "Well, you obviously want to do this study. Can we help? If I can organise a scholarship from council, do you want to take it?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was a bit of a first. We're talking 1968.
1968 scholarship.
He organised a scholarship which paid for fees and books, which fees existed at the time, fairly meagre, but still fees and books. And I went to live in Toowoomba at the residential college, and proceeded to complete my business degree. But the arrangement was that I'd come back during semester breaks and work in the council. So that gave me some pin money as well, and the guarantee of a job if I succeeded in passing.
Okay.
And I only got the fees and books paid if I passed the subjects each year. So I managed to finish the degree in the 3 years, and completed it at the end of 1971, towards the end of 1971. And that then gave me the opportunity to go obviously elsewhere with the basis of the degree.
Yeah, so you got your degree and your certificate.
Yes, when I finished the degree, I then applied myself to doing the certificate, which was not based on the universities at the time. It was still the department's examination, which I did.
And then you probably left Dolby.
Well, I had a 2-year obligation to remain at council as a result of the survey, the scholarship, which I did, and then subsequently went to Rockhampton.
So you would have been trained in a lot more positions than just assistant race clerk in that time at Dolby.
Oh, sure.
So
I mean,
at the end of jack of all trades.
Yeah, at the end of the degree, I was offered guaranteed a position at a certain level, and was the senior clerk finance, which was effectively the accountant in council. But at that stage, Dolby ran the electricity distribution service from Dolby west to the border, before the industry was rationalised under the state statutory bodies. So my experience was, very broad across the business of local government. So that was a great learning place, because of one, it was a good size, had that breadth of roles and responsibilities, and great leaders, to support, the younger graduates.
Yeah,
So.
that's great. Great start. So then Rockhampton, what was the job there that attracted you?
Well, I applied for the job of deputy town clerk at the age of, I think, 23. It was a bit of an ambit claim. I knew I was perhaps at the margins of being accepted, and was not successful in the job. There was a chap who was there working in the CEO or accountant's town clerk's office who got the job, but before I left Rockhampton, they said, "Well, do you want a job? We'll give you one." And they created a position of assistant to the town clerk. So I worked in the town clerk's office then for a period of 5 years. And that was, again, a great learning experience. One, because the CEO, who was the person who gave me the opportunity, was a great mentor, and it was at the time when Rex Pilbeam was the mayor of Rockhampton, and he was a character larger than life and well known for his, if you like, exploits on a whole range of fronts. not only in his business life but in his public life. And when I got there, he had been, prior to that, both the mayor of the council for a number of years and also the member for Rockhampton South.
Oh, yeah.
So he was well known across Queensland, and whilst he was known as something of, if you like, a philanderer, his achievements as mayor were outstanding, and his work ethic and his commitment to the city and his genuine support and engagement with his staff at all levels gave me an amazing exposure, to that part of the business. But it also came at a bit of a cost, because Rex loved at the end of each day to invite the town clerk and the engineer and the health surveyor, the deputy CEO, and myself, mainly because I was the drinks waiter, to join them for the afternoon celebration. And probably for about an hour, 5 days a week for close on 2 years, we were doing what the mayor beckoned us to do. So there was a lot learned in those conversations, as well as a fair amount of weight put on as a consequence of drinking the horrible Max beer, which was the brewery, the brew out of the local brewery.
Yeah. Who was the town clerk?
The guy was Jim Glover, was his name.
Oh.
He had come to Rockhampton from Townsville, where he had been the city treasurer. But prior to his entry into local government in Townsville, he'd been in the Air Force there, and he was a great person manager, and gave me great opportunities to do things. And at the time, it was when when the federal government changed in 1972, along came the local government grants system, the federal financial assistance grants from the Commonwealth. So there were submissions to be written, and that was something that I got to do. It was the time when the Arts Council of Australia, again under the Labor government at the time, introduced a significant number of funding programs, and Rockhampton, under the guidance of and enthusiasm of Rex Pilbeam, built a theatre and an art gallery, and purchased under a 3-for-1 purchasing program some very significant Australian artworks to put into the new art gallery. And supporting the mayor in the role of actually travelling the country, twisting arms and extracting money out of people to fund the council's contribution to the 3-for-1 scheme, was again a very significant learning of how you deal with community, how you deal with business leaders, how you engage with governments. So all of that was, again, great foundational learning on intergovernmental and other relationships that are fundamental to the business of local government.
And an interesting part of Rockhampton's history as well.
Oh, sure. He was a great man. In fact, he was always seen as being larger than life and bold as brass and noisy and whatever, but he had a very significant soft side, as a lot of folk like that do. And sitting at times with him in those afternoons, having a drink or two, and when the others would leave, I was the last to leave. It was appropriate that I stayed behind and indulged the mayor, as he would want to have a chat, and that was a significant learning too. It was a great experience. As I said, it was health-wise, it mightn't have been the wisest of moves, but anyway, I've survived it well and truly.
A lot of stuff you wouldn't find in textbooks.
Precisely.
You're still at 23?
Sorry?
23? You were 23?
I was there at 23,
yeah.
So you were there for a few years?
I was there for 5 years, and in that role, and in that time had the chance to deputise as the deputy CEO, and even had a few weeks as the CEO as they were both away. So I was really finding my feet well and truly in that place at that time, and I certainly attribute the support from those two gentlemen in their respective roles as one of the great foundational learnings for me for the future.
Can I just jump in for a
Speed up.
second? Because I think that for what you're saying, you've been mentored on a number of occasions, and that has been or has cemented your career. So, in your view, how important it is that we keep mentoring others, and do you think that because of the higher competition that now there is in for anyone wanting to work in council, do you think that the high competition kills mentoring programs or the spontaneous mentoring more than anything?
Oh, look, it could. There's, we're all so busy in what we're doing, and particularly, CEOs and mayors in their respective roles, that perhaps these days they don't have the time to actually step back and look to how they can support, people within their own ranks or others within the sector that, want to do it. But it was absolutely fundamental to my ability to go up that learning curve at a great rate of knots. And I think it's even more essential today because with a lot of people being recruited into local government from outside local government, they bring, if you like, technical skills and other management and business skills. But if you haven't worked in government and you don't know the quirks of the intergovernment of the leadership and relationship issues with politicians at the local level, then you'll suffer, and many do, as we know. So if mayors and CEOs, and if you like, the Dad's Army Brigade that you, Ian, and I are part of, were able to fill that role, then it would make a lot of difference. And I'm finding now in the work that I'm doing that I can be of value in some small way to mayors, CEOs and councillors in the various work I'm doing around the state, in some small way. So sharing those experiences, I think, is essential to today's leadership and tomorrow's leadership within local government.
And do you think that being mentored equals having a higher motivation to go and work?
Oh, look, I think so, because the people who get to understand the rewards that you can get out of local government, which is more so from the contribution that you can actually make in those roles to the development of communities and the support for the residents of a given local government area, makes people appreciate what the business of local government is about. You can actually see where you've been on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis, and that is very fulfilling for individuals. And if they can get to appreciate that at an early point, then they're potentially more likely to want to stay, to ride out the bumps, the peaks and the troughs of the difficulties of relationships, or for that matter, know how to negotiate those difficult times, and build a relationship with, as a CEO, with mayor and with councillors that can transcend difficult times. And if we could do anything to minimise the churn at that level, then I think that would be a very valuable contribution to local government.
Very high now. We don't see local government officers having such long careers as I have the opportunity to see now doing this project.
Absolutely.
So I was eventually getting to where you are now, but so probably we need to speed it up a bit. So obviously your basics were in Dalby and Rockhampton, and then perhaps we could just move forward to where you first took a CEO job or town clerk, shire clerk?
It was a CEO's role at Darwin City Council. So I went from Rockhampton to Darwin at the end of 1977, and that was a tremendous achievement in many respects. I mean, I was all of 27 at the time, and managed to get the job. The mayor, or mayor at the time, Lord Mayor at the time, a lady called Dr. Ella Stack, had been a mayor for some time, and in fact had become well known in the city for a number of years as a GP obstetrician, and so she had supported the community for a long time in that role. But when Cyclone Tracy hit, she played a very significant role in the immediate post-cyclone.
74?
74, and that was in December. It was Christmas Eve, 1974.
Remember that?
And when the city suffered significantly, as did the council, and its operations then for a couple of years were limited by a loss of staff, a lack of capacity to do a lot of things, even though there was significant rebuilding going on. The administration of council was really difficult. And when the CEO at the time resigned, she decided that she wanted to take, if you like, a fresher look, newer look, and I was lucky enough at 27 to get a job. But I attribute the fact that I'd had those great mentors who were prepared to obviously be referees and supporters who could endorse my application, and I managed to get the job and was there for 5 years in that role, a significant part of the rebuilding of the city, but also rebuilding the council's organisational capacity and systems that, as I said, had suffered for a number of years. There hadn't been any audited financial statements done from 1974 through until I got there in the end of 1977. So that was just a demonstration of, there was money in the bank, but we weren't certain how much or what it was for, committed for or not committed for.
That would have been a major task.
So it was a matter of sorting out the piggy bank first and going from there. So, but again, another great leader in Dr. Ella Stack and a very energetic younger council. I mean, when Cyclone Tracy hit, there were 47,000 people in Darwin. Within a week of the cyclone, there were 10,000 because a significant number had to be evacuated because the town had been so badly damaged, particularly accommodation. When I got there, 52,000 people were on the census, so it had rebuilt very quickly, and there were 75 nationalities registered on the census that had just been taken.
Wow.
So you can imagine the multicultural nature of the place, and for a boy from Dalby and Rockhampton going there, what an amazing exposure and opportunity to understand much more about community, the dynamics of communities, the great cultural mixture that Rockhampton was, and again with a council that was very enthusiastic, young. I mean, the average age of the town at that stage was 34, which is very young in a profile of any community, and most of those people were, as I said, new. They hadn't been there for very long, so it was made up of a significant mixture of new people to the town, many of them appointed by their companies to go, like me, cutting their teeth in the business. So there was great enthusiasm. That's where I reckon we first found Can Do. There was, someone said, "Can we do it?" Of course we can. And then you think about, well, what do we do? How do we do it? And it didn't really matter. I mean, yes, mistakes were made, but it was a great way to learn and a great way to actually do something with a community that was everyone in it at business level, government level, and significant defence population were all about actually doing something because they were looking to make careers and opportunities for them. So again, another great place to be.
Yeah, okay. And again, that you're highlighting the relationship with the mayor. So I think that's another vital thing, as well as the mentoring. It's to be able to build a working relationship with your mayor as CEO.
Sure.
And there's a lot of things that have broken down because that just doesn't work. You got to
Precisely. I mean, she, as I said, she was a great lady, enthusiastic about the community, and recognising that I and a couple of other younger folk that I was able to recruit, both having had a local government experience, but interstate, one out of South Australia, one from Victoria, and one here from Queensland. That actually built our capacity again to operate, and she was very supportive of that.
Because the territory does operate a bit differently to the other states, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's I might add part of that, if you like, energy and drive in the community came because on the 1st of July 1978, some 6-7 months after I arrived, the Northern Territory got self-government, which was a step away from the central administration of Canberra to a self-governing territory, almost that of a state, but they still had, if you like, federal oversight of their legislation as opposed to state government oversight. But it had its parliament, had chief minister, ministers, departments, and there was all of that was about actually making things happen. And it was at a time when in fact the financial assistance grants, it was personal income tax, the PIT scheme, was at its height. It was 2% of Commonwealth personal income tax revenue came to local government, and that gave us a significant growth in revenues, which was great. You could do an awful lot. So it was a good combination of opportunity at a territory level, at a local government level, to actually make things happen. And the Lord Mayor was very open to what we could bring to make that happen, to support it.
Yeah, the same sort of opportunities don't exist today.
No,
opportunities and fundings, etc.
Growth funding is, that's almost, it's an oxymoron these days, isn't it?
So from Darwin, is that when you moved into local government association?
Yeah. I'd as I said, been there 5 years, but my first exposure to a great extent to the local government association network came from the territory. There were 4 councils in the territory at that stage: Darwin, Katherine, Tennant Creek and Alice Springs. And there was a fledgling local government association, the LGMA Qld. And the position of honorary secretary of the LGMA Qld. Guess who? Me. That was not a problem. I was loving it. It was, great. Another thing I can get to do and learn. And because of that, the LGA was part of the Australian Local Government Association network. Right. So I got to meet and engage at the federal level with people from the other state associations. It was also at the time when there was the Australian Centre for Intergovernmental Relations, which was Canberra-based, and that was looking at how the system of federal, state and local government worked. And it also happened at the time when constitutional conventions were occurring as we headed towards the debate about constitutional reform in Australia. So I had the exposure to the Australian Local Government Association network, exposure to, if you like, federal government levels of intergovernmental debate, and that whet my appetite then for an involvement in that wider, if you like, intergovernmental relationship work, federal, state, local. And as I'd been in Darwin 5 years, I was unsuccessful in an attempt to be the CEO of Perth City Council. They did offer me, the deputy got the job, and they did offer me the role of deputy CEO, but I decided not to take it, thinking, well, I'll hang about and see what else might come of it. And then the opportunity came to come back to Queensland to the Local Government Association as then secretary. And my two daughters, well, my eldest daughter was not far from high school, and I thought, well, if I'm going to move, it's probably a good time to make the move now. So with our two daughters that had come with us from Rockhampton and our son that was born there, we headed back to Brisbane, where I took the role at the end of 1982 as then secretary, and the position's now the CEO of the LGA here in Queensland.
So the whole LGAQ career is a chapter in itself, isn't it?
Gosh.
It'd be very hard to summarise that.
Yeah, well...
maybe we should do it justice and try and highlight the significant periods of that, if you can.
Well, I had the two stints, 82 to 92, and then went to work in state government in the role of local government commissioner for 4 and a bit years, then back at LGAQ. But that first period from 82 to 92 was, again, a great opportunity. It's fair to say that the LGA at the time, 1982, was, if you like, bouncing along the bottom. It really didn't have a lot of capacity. I mean, there were 4 staff at LGAQ when I first came there, and the job was to say, right, you've got to build the relevance of the LGAQ to have value for its membership. So, and I have to say, it was at such a low ebb. Only one way it could go was get better. So, for any effort put into it was going to produce results. So, through that time, we started to build the systems and the capability and engage more effectively with the membership, and construct events of value, not only the annual conference, but initiated the first of the sort of elected member training programs that occurs post-election or mid-term. That hadn't been much of a feature of the role of the LGA, but at the same time, actually, make LGA a credible voice to government for councils. So, through that 10-year period was a...
Doug Tucker refers to that as the Hoffman decade.
yes. And Doug, rest his soul, too, was a great advocate for local government and a great supporter of mine. We used to spend a lot of time talking, and his knowledge was invaluable in understanding, if you like, the system of local government in Queensland, because he'd been studying it for for all of his life, and was lecturing in it at UQ. But likewise could support a lot of what we did, because he was sought after as a commentator on ABC radio, other radio, about local government. So his assistance was invaluable in profiling local government and giving voice to support the things that the association was starting to do at the time. Yeah.
So is there anyone else you'd want to highlight in that period? I think a young fellow called Greg Hoffman came on board at some stage.
Well, that was when I left in 1992. I recruited Greg in as my replacement. He came from Townsville. Yep. But again, the mayors that were the presidents of the LGAQ are the people that sort of stand out for me. The president at the time when I was recruited was a gentleman called Fred Rogers, mayor of Stanthorpe Shire, and he'd been in that role for a number of years, and very well respected, very considered in his approach and his relationships with government. But sadly, he passed away in the June of 1983.
Oh, right.
And I'd only been there the 7 months or so, and subsequent to that, there was an acting president, but the president who subsequently got elected was a gentleman called Albie Abbott, Sir Albie Abbott, who was the mayor of Mackay. And he was a very feisty individual in the most positive of ways, an incredibly confident advocate for the business of local government. And he had significant political connections into the government of the day. He was a member of, I think, the Liberal Party at the time, and that was when Joe Peterson and Russ Hinds and others were well and truly, at the zenith of their powers. And local government was really on the receiving end of quite a number of decisions. It was at the time when councils had the full planning powers, and if the state government didn't like what councils were doing, people would make representations to the state government. The state government would call the matter in, and the councils would lose the power to make the decision because they'd be overridden, and the minister would make the decision. And I have very vivid memories of an occasion in which Sir Albie and I went to meet Russ Hinds. The council, can't remember whether it was Caloundra or Maroochy Shires at the time, had refused the planning approval for a major development, and it was simply just the processes that the councils had gone through. The objection process, the consideration of the objections, the compliance with the planning scheme, there were no issues except the developer wasn't happy. Called it in, and subsequently resolutions passed at annual conference and other district meetings sought assistance from the LGMA Qld to engage with the government about cease and desist with this practice of overriding council's planning decisions. So Sir Albert and I wrote the letter. We went to see Russ Hinds some time later, and as you know, Russ was larger than life, physically as well as politically. Albie was built like a jockey. I was built like a beanpole. So the two of us go in there, and Albie says to Russ Hinds, "We're not happy with what you're doing, Russ. This is totally unacceptable to local government that you are overriding these decisions. It was all done in accordance with the legislation. The due process was followed, the decision was taken, and you simply took it over because you didn't like it. That's not acceptable to us, and we want you to stop." Well, you can imagine the reaction that got from Russ Hinds, who stood up at his desk, which was a very large desk, and in fact a purpose-built, custom-made desk, a very heavy timber desk, not a normal office desk. And he stood up and he thundered across the room, "How dare you tell me how I should do my job? If I want to do this, I will do it. I will make decisions in the interest of the state, and if it's about development, it'll happen, and you won't prevent me." And all the time he's bellowing at us, he's leaning, and the desk is even moving towards him. So here's the two of us, the other side of the desk, being confronted by this desk moving towards us and the prospect of Russ Hinds coming over the top of it. So we went outside, and yes, we were told well and truly what we could do. So short shift, we went outside and we lamented the situation, but then had a really good laugh about it because it was an experience that to this day I remember as a
no-win situation. Really.
No-win situation. In fact, I don't know. I think I was probably mid-30s at the time, and Russ, whenever he'd meet me, wherever it was, he'd say, "Hello, young fellow, how are you?" And maybe he was being complimentary, but no, he wasn't. It was more a matter of putting a put down that you, young fellow, won't tell me what to do. But again, your learnings come from great experiences, but they also come from those more difficult experiences as to.
And that would have been towards the end of his term as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, I can't. Yes, probably. I can't recall exactly when it was, but it probably could be, given it was Albie Abbott as president. It was more likely in the period of 1984, 85, I think. Yeah. So he too was a great teacher, and he led a very effective association.
Yeah.
His experience was great, and others followed him. Tom Pine, then Mayor of Mulgrave Shire up in Cairns, followed by Jim Pennell, and there were a couple of interims in the time there.
With about Jim,
with a gentleman called Kerry Park, and also Alec Barr. So they were all great supporters and learners, and teachers of me, and helped in what we were able to achieve in that 10 years, which actually lifted the association's profile and capacity. And when I'd left, we'd gone from 4 staff to 12 staff. Right. Quite a bit different these days, but that was able to occur because of the support from the membership and the things that we could achieve.
And you would have noticed built the conference regime up a bit over that time.
Yes.
Back in those days, it was the councils would be attending as a team, like you'd have your mayor, CEO, and you'd only have certain people attending, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have the whole, as they do today.
I guess it was open to everybody, but the tradition was simply a mayor and a CEO, or mayor, deputy mayor and a CEO, a relatively small event. But it did grow in changing the program, or growing the program from simply being talking heads and significant debate on motions, which was always seen and still is an important part of policy development and issues being developed to be represented on behalf of council. But also it started, we introduced the learning opportunities into the program, with workshops and concurrent programs where people with different interests could be supported. So the conference had multiple facets to it, and the numbers grew because, here that when you run a program, you have people who look for certain things, and others look for something else, and something else. Not everybody embraces all aspects of the program, so you create the program to have a variety of attractions and elements that will see it of value, bringing together the local government family, but they get immense value out of the opportunities outside of the conference in terms of the networks and the sharing. So it became a much bigger event that to this day is built on those various elements to provide opportunities for people from councils.
It must have been a difficult decision for you to leave in 92 when the opportunity came up for the government commissioner?
Yes, it was, and in fact it had been at the end of, if you like, the 10 years when the Fitzgerald inquiry had taken place, and the demise of the coalition government, the National Liberal Party coalition government. Joe Peterson was off the scene, and the Labor government had started the business of reforming or removing, as it was called, the gerrymander electorally, introducing one vote, one value system in the creation of electoral divisions, ramping up the legislative processes. The governance processes were starting to move, and the desire of the government through the Electoral and Administrative Review Commission to change the boundaries at the time, to start the process of rationalisation, hadn't gone well. I was involved with, obviously, the LGMA Qld in its arguments against what the government was trying to do, but most thinking people saw the need for there to be a reform. I mean, there were 134 councils, then add in what were the Indigenous councils that had been established through that period. There were 32 of them, so there were 160 something councils in Queensland, and the challenges that they faced individually were significant, and the need for reform was evident. We hadn't liked how the government had gone about it, and it was evident that people were going to be opposed to the change. By its very nature, they're not going to embrace it.
But the change was significant. It went down to half of it.
Yeah, and what occurred though was I was asked by the then local government minister, Tom Burns, who I'd been arguing against what the government was doing, to sort of say, well, if you think you can do it a better way, do you want to have a go? And I thought long and hard about it, because I knew full well that I would be seen to be going to the dark side. But I did believe that a reform was necessary, so the government created an office called the Office of Local Government Commissioner, and gave me a 5-year time span in which to undertake reviews, but it was only on the basis of referrals. So I didn't have a unilateral right to say, you 5 councils, I'm now going to review you. It was the government giving referrals to actually go and look at change, and for I and the team that I recruited to build the process. And we'd always hoped that a process built around significant engagement with the councils, looking to ways and means. And it wasn't just a question of saying, right, we're only looking at amalgamation. Well, we were tasked with looking at amalgamation and or boundary change and or resource sharing amongst the councils to actually provide a change that would be tailor-made to whatever that area happened to be. So the review process was, it took a good 18 months, the elements that we built into it and the engagement processes and the legislative requirements that if something was to be considered, then it had to be put out as a preliminary proposal for public feedback and then consideration, ultimately decision for the government then to decide if they would do it. So that process then, over that just on 4 years, because what happened is the government changed, and the return of the coalition government under Rob Borbidge had come to the election with a program of changing or stopping this dastardly process of reform. So the numbers had reduced, not significantly in that period of time. Effectively 10, numbers had come down by 10, but there were, boundary changes that had occurred. There were resource sharing arrangements put in place. So potentially it might have continued if the government had not changed, but they changed, and sometime after that they shut the office down, and that was the end of that. I decided, well, I'll hang up a shingle then and do some consulting. And strangely enough, the local government association in New South Wales was looking to lead a process of voluntary reform of councils. They down there had been likewise had many attempts or calls for there to be rationalisation of local government in New South Wales that had not proceeded. So they started a process there of the association initiating voluntary reform. So I was asked by the CEO of the New South Wales Association, a chap called Murray Kidney, who I'd known from my work at LGMA Qld over the 10 years, and my work as local government commissioner, to actually work with him. And so I started that process down there, and believe it or not, got the councils to agree, and The Armidale Numeric Council at the moment is a merger. The Richmond Valley Council in northern New South Wales is a product of combining Casino Town Council and Richmond Shire. And then the council in inner city, Sydney, Drummoyne Council combined with one other name eludes me now, is an inner city change. So I continued, if you like, my reform work, but again around trying to do it on a voluntary basis where councils and communities would work out what they would do. And I did that for about 2 years in that time after I left here.
To 1996, 1998.
Yeah.
And then you were back in LGAQ.
Yeah, well, when Greg Hoffman took over from me as the CEO in 1992, I found myself having continued engagement with LGAQ through the role of local government commissioner, and would still attend conferences and be on the end of quite a deal of pointed questioning and other issues, but I still maintain my interaction with councils, through my role as commissioner, but also through annual conference and other district conferences that I'd attend. So when the opportunity came up with the person that was in the role of the Director of Policy and Representation leaving LGAQ, I thought, well, I'd always loved what I did there, and so I put my hand up, and the question was, well, have I burnt so many bridges that I can't go back over the over the debris? And no, the president at the time was a gentleman called Noel Playford.
Yep.
And in fact, through my role as commissioner, I'd been involved in. He was the mayor of Noosa.
Yep.
And I'd been involved in an assessment of Noosa and the council to its north, Widgie Shire. I had been involved in the merger of Gympie with Widgie as local government commissioner, and that had taken place. Mm-hmm. But there was also the conversation with Noosa and Widgie. So I was well known to both the mayors at that stage, even though I hadn't worked with them when I was at LGAQ originally. Anyway, Noel was more than happy to say, right, no, you can come back. And so I returned to LGAQ at the end of 97, yeah. I think it was just before conference, so August, September of 97, in that role. And stayed in there through various iterations of its title through until when I finished in October of 1996.
1996, yeah.
No, 2016.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's just a decade short.
Yeah. Oh, with his back.
Yeah. Yeah, so that gave me, all up, I've lost the count now, how many years at LGAQ? 10 originally, then 10, from 97 to almost another 20, so it's almost 29, 30 years.
So 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years at LGAQ in the two roles.
Wow.
And then you would have come back into the amalgamation reform of courtesy of Peter Beattie.
Sure. In fact...
all the previous voluntary work was thrown out the window.
Well, in fact... the LGAQ, under the leadership of Paul Bell, who was the president at the time, recognising that we needed to have an open mind to the reform challenge, or to the operational and political challenges, had LGAQ initiate a program called Size, Shape and Sustainability, which was councils themselves entering into negotiations to actually try to identify how and where they could change. So I brought my experience of local government commissioner's role, my consulting role, which had been very much about voluntary processes in New South Wales, back into LGAQ, not at the time, with that in mind, but subsequently when Paul became the president, to actually work with the Labor government that was in power then under Beattie to sort of say, right, we'd like to do this, but we want to do it on our terms. We want councils to do it. So LGAQ, created this this process, a voluntary process under the banner Size, Shape, Sustainability. The government funded it. We were able to recruit facilitators to work with groups of councils to have the conversation. And that occurred then with the support of Desley Boyle, who was who was the Minister for Local Government, but a former councillor in Cairns. So she appreciated what it meant. And we got to the point then in
So Beattie wasn't the Premier then when Desley Boyle was Minister? Couldn't have been.
I'm just can't quite put the names
anyway,
to the times, but
not important.
what happened was that it had, the whole process had gone nearly 2 years, and in 2000 and
It was going too slowly.
it was going too slowly, but that's the nature of voluntary reform, having people
Indeed.
see merit, craft a change that they could accept, and of the 125 councils there were potentially involved, it didn't involve the Indigenous councils. Of the 125 that existed at the time, 111 were actively involved in these negotiations, and 3 groups were at the point of making decisions about change, and most likely would have moved, but the government decided it was all taking too long. They were looking to their electoral cycle, they were looking to council's electoral cycle, they wanted it to happen. So in April of 2007, they announced that they were taking the process. Size, Shape, Sustainability was over. They were creating a local government reform commission, and would by August of that year determine what would happen, and then would enable a change process with new elections to occur in March of 2008. So, in less than a period of 6 months, they actually decided what would happen and how it would happen. And the LGAQ was involved in seeking to negotiate the processes of change. So I led our role in that process to try to moderate in some respects the extremes of what the forced process was looking to impose. Anyway, they announced their decisions, as I said, I think it was in August, and then elections occurred in 2008, and that saw the reduction of the number of councils back to 73 at that time. So, that was a...
Do you feel you had some success in the moderation, or...?
Oh, look, to some extent, we were able to extract a bit of money from the government at the time to support the transition. Not near enough, of course, but the fact that they hadn't spent all the money that had been budgeted to support the voluntary process meant that we had an argument there. But the government was intent on what it was going to do. In fact, Beattie had appointed at that stage Minister Fraser,
Yes.
as the local government minister, who was a newly, recently elected young gun within the party to be the minister, and he was singularly focused on doing this. So there was no turning back from the government's plan to do what they did, and we have what we have now, albeit when they lost power and Campbell Newman came to power, he offered the opportunity to de-amalgamate, and 4 councils, or ultimately 4 councils, were re-established to give us the 77 we have now.
Yes.
There was a double whammy with the amalgamations too, with the water reform, particularly down southeast.
Yeah, well, that was likewise a BD initiative, which in fact happened beforehand, wasn't it? It was before the amalgamation. So local government's role all structures changed dramatically. What I guess when you look in hindsight, I had always believed there was the need for the change. We couldn't have sustained the 134 councils and all of the Indigenous councils as they were. We did need to change. We have changed. By and large, it's been a success. Not without its still residual challenges in a number of places.
Still facing sustainability issues in a lot of ones.
And that's a debate in itself these days. In many parts of the state, you will never have councils that can fully sustain themselves. It's just the nature of the revenue raising capacity they have, of the expectations of the community in terms of service delivery, and the fact that if you said a council's not sustainable, we won't have a council. And in fact, in part of New South Wales, on the western border of New South Wales with South Australia, butting up the Northern Territory, where there's no local government, the state government provides the services. They effectively subsidise it. They run it and subsidise it. In the northern part of South Australia, where it bounds with New South Wales, with the Northern Territory and Western Australia, there's areas that are unincorporated. There's no local government there. The state government runs the services. So you have to accept that situationally, geographically, and from a population and economic base, there will be areas that need to be supported by government, and that's the reality. Now, if the government says we want you to stand on your own 2 feet, then they will end up having to do it themselves, and in fact will cost more. And in an administrative sense, and in a political sense, and a community sense, areas will suffer if that's how they would choose to approach it. And in fact, if they said we need to amalgamate more Western Queensland, Central Queensland, Northern Queensland to be in local government units, because even so, you will not achieve the sustainability on that basis in those parts of the country, of our state in any case.
Well, it's not just about local government. I don't believe we can sustain 3 levels of government. And there was a lot of debate about whether, we did away with state and made it federal and regional government.
True.
But that never sort of got any legs. Lots of discussion, but it never sort of...
No, well, it's the state's got sovereignty and the Commonwealth's got sovereignty. Local government doesn't. So we're the
creatures of legislation.
Yeah, and we're the vulnerable party in that discussion about change. So that's the dilemma we face. I mean, you look at what this state government does. It subsidises electricity costs for the western part, of Queensland. They've chosen to do that because if you were to impose the full cost of what's involved there, those costs would be totally unreasonable, and would in fact impede a lot of industry as well as community life. So if the state's prepared to subsidise its responsibilities, is a demonstration of the limitations of rural, remote, regional communities to actually sustain themselves, and it's incumbent on government to recognise that and support it.
Because Queensland is geographically challenging as well, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
Yes.
But we are, as we know, far more decentralised in terms of population centres than the other states. and an awful lot of our significant economic activity is located in those areas.
Yeah.
So the existence of councils, albeit supported at the state level, is pretty essential to enabling that to occur in a way that is responsible but effective and can be leveraged in time, in my view, to make the communities and the councils more sustainable.
Yeah.
So would you say that what it works in other states like New South Wales or Victoria would not work here in Queensland?
I don't think so. You certainly don't find, to my understanding, that the residents of those unincorporated areas in New South Wales and South Australia, applauding and the situation they have. They're pretty much out of sight, out of mind, and there's no local voice of real substance. Well, the councils are a local voice in our state, and they should be supported. Perhaps there's ways and means by which they can be a little bit more engaged in collaborative effort amongst themselves. And when we look to the challenges of recruiting and retaining CEOs, but the same thing applies at the other professional levels, the engineering and other technical capacities. It is difficult to recruit, retain people in those areas, and likewise that the revolving door there
Yes.
diminishes their momentum.
Exactly.
So there are challenges that they have. There's no doubt about that. Not just in a financial sense, but in, if you like, the fundamentals of the organisational operations that need to be addressed. And if the government's got any plans about, well, how do we deal with this, then they should look to some of those, if you like, operational before they look to structural challenges to respond.
You've certainly got a magnificent career to look back on. We're down to our last 15 minutes. So, what I'll say is we've talked about the reform, but as well as a reformer, I think you would say you're very good at setting policy. A lot of the policies that local government has today are because of you and the work you've done. Would you put that reform and policy as your two biggest achievements, do you think?
Well, yes.
Big question.
Yeah, big question. I've never really sort of listed them out with a ranking of what might have been the highest to the least of achievements. But what I do know, when I came to LGAQ in 1982, the annual conference was the primary process, and there were these district associations that did similarly have conferences or meetings, and they would pass resolutions, and a letter would be written off to the government. This is what the resolution was, we want you to do something about it. At one point, I can recall like 130 resolutions coming out of an annual conference, and that was when there was that many councils, 134 councils.
Everyone wanted to get their motion up.
Everyone wanted to get their motion up, and accepting that it was all important to them. A lot of it was repeat things that had been run over decades, about either a funding program or a bit of a regulatory program.
Daylight saving, for instance.
Oh, daylight saving. But I do remember the pest and weed debates about Nagura burr, Harrisia cactus, joint sensitive plant. And I didn't have a clue what they looked like or what they were, but I was writing the letters about how powerless the state was and the need to control these and funding schemes for them. But because they'd been the perennials and had gone in each year or every second year, and an answer would come back to say we can't do this, but we might do that, and it'd come again. It was really just a ever diminishing circle, spiral into nothing. We were wasting a lot of time achieving little. So I thought, well, let's convert all of the sort of aspirations into a statement of what are our priorities, and actually get to be strategic about the things that we wanted to do, not just to have a scattergun, buckshot going everywhere, hoping you hit some sort of target. And linked to that was when are the opportunities that you have to have the most impact? Well, obviously it's at election time, pre-election time.
Yep.
So, let's not only look to our policies and promote them in a more strategic, considered, prioritised fashion, but come election time is when you want to influence most potential state government or federal government to its policies to support you. So it was certainly in the latter part, my second period at LGMA Qld, that we really ramped up this approach to our policy development, advocacy, election engagement at both federal and state level, but particularly at the state level, to I think promote local government in a way that it hadn't been able to promote itself before, and at the same time start to build, if you like, the coalition with the community. We were doing these things for and on behalf of the community, not just on behalf of local government. You talk about we're here representing the community, not representing the council.
Grassroots.
The grassroots. The council can be seen as a political body engaging another political body, but the community engaging in the political process has a different dimension to it, and if you like, takes away potentially those people who would think the council's promoting its self-interest.
Yeah.
We're about the community, not about ourselves here. Yeah. So it was around, if you like, that policy engagement framework that things started to change.
Yeah.
Particularly in the last 10 years of the time I was at LGMA Qld, and I'm pretty pleased about that because it's pitched local government to a level that it mightn't have been before, and we've leveraged off the fact that the community regards local government more highly than it does state government and federal government, and notwithstanding events of the past few years with CCC related investigations, inquiries, LGMA Qd's latest community attitude survey still shows local government's rating is higher than state and federal, and it demonstrates that the problems that are evident in those matters that are before the courts relate to a few and not the whole. And people will look at that and be disappointed and annoyed and express those views, but for the majority of the community, if they see their local government actually doing things, meeting their basic needs, giving them opportunities to enjoy their community, then they will think positively, by and large, positively of it.
Yeah. So your passion for local government is shining through. Even in your retirement, you're still working for local government.
Well,
to today.
I brand myself as a local government junkie. Once you're hooked, you're hooked. My work up with the councils in the northwest of Queensland is built on the fact that I knew that area very well and spent a lot of time there when I was at LGMA Qd, but recognised the challenges they faced, and when the opportunity came to continue working with them in this role of executive officer, then that was one I jumped at and enjoyed very much.
Very good. You mentioned all the good things about local government. What's a bad thing? What did you strike that the low light of local government over your career?
Certainly the matters of the moment, in terms of the CCC investigations and the corruption allegations and matters before the courts is disappointing in the extreme, and no matter the fact I said that it doesn't represent the whole, it's still a blight.
It affects their reputation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has reputational damage, and I feel for the good people in local government that that get caught in the collateral damage in that they have to live with, if you like, jibes or criticisms of what they're doing, simply because they become an easier target, and the changes that have occurred, particularly recently with the legislation around the changes in governance arrangements that have ramped up the pressures on them for what are seen as good reasons, but it makes it so difficult. They potentially can find themselves in hot water for oversights, not with any intention of wrongdoing, but simply an oversight. And quite a number of the people that I know and that talk with now are saying, enough's enough. This is not what I entered local government for. Yep. And the pressure that's now on me makes it untenable for me to enjoy the job and to have my family supportive of my continuation here. They simply say, leave it alone and come back and do something that's more productive, more enjoyable, and you have time to spend with us, not live with the pressure that you bring home from work on a daily basis. But a lot of these things are cyclical. When problems occur, the corrective action sees the pendulum go away one way and then it'll come back again. No doubt, a government will change and it'll have a slightly different view to what should happen, and the thing will change again. And I've seen that pendulum swing in a regulatory sense. A whole range of things go back and forth over 50 years in the business, and that's just the nature of the process. So it'll correct itself. But the thing that, if you like, is here and now, and I cite the challenges of recruiting and retaining staff. Local government is under incredible pressure at its management and leadership level. I mean, there's pressures on councillors, as I just described, out of the regulatory system put on them, and there's likewise pressure on CEOs and other leadership team members. Overlay the community expectations and the speed with which things are expected to happen.
Yep.
You find that it's a very difficult business right now. Yep. That's not necessarily going to change, so we have to find a way to negotiate that.
You can't slow it down till we catch up.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
We have to look to how we can chart these courses. I mean, in looking at the pressure points that are on elected members now and how the reputation of councils can suffer, I see it as a real responsibility of CEOs and governance managers and executive leadership teams to actually be the significant, guardians of the system. You can't just expect, mayors and councillors to know now a very complex suite of legislation around what their obligations are and are not, and how to do this and how to do that. You don't want them to be, having to spend their time doing that, when in fact you want them to be, looking to the future, the strategy for the community. That's their job, planning for the future, looking to the resource allocation for that. That, difficult and all as it may be, I do think it's the role of CEOs and governance people and the leadership team to do what they can to actually keep the council out of hot water.
Yeah.
I think that's fun. I mean, they've got the capacity, the time, and the means by which they can understand those things and guide their council and support their council. Don't simply say it's your job, you look after yourselves, you've got to keep your nose clean. I think the organisation needs to take at a management level a lead in ensuring that they do meet those requirements now.
Yeah. So you think a mayor-CEO relationship will return to the old days where they used to have to really rely on each other? to
You
for
can
the
live.
good of the community and the council.
You can live in hope,
Yeah.
Ian. In fact,
Legislation doesn't help us in that regard.
no, it doesn't.
Separating more and more, actually.
Yeah. Well, I did mention back when I was in my days at Rockhampton, and Jim Glover, the CEO, was appointed me in that role, and in those discussions with the mayor in the afternoon after work, over a beer or whatever, and conversations I had with him, it got to the point when he would say words to the effect, my role as then the town clerk is to get the council re-elected. And that of itself is an interesting statement, because it's almost being seen as politically aligned to the council.
Yeah.
But what he was saying was, the council gets elected, the mayor has a suite of policies and the councillors have theirs. They amalgamate them all into a plan of action for the term, reflected in programs that they want to pursue, budgets they adopt, and things they want to do. And if the council is able to say at the end of the term, here's what we plan to do, and this is what we did do, and we have achieved what we set out to do, then more times than not, they could get re-elected. And Jim Glover was saying, well, in my role, if that's what you want to do, and if I can help you achieve what you set out to achieve, then I'm helping you get re-elected.
Yeah.
It wasn't a political statement about individuals, it was about council achieving what it set out to achieve.
Yeah.
And
Which is what it's all about, really.
It's about what it's about. And I do know when Jim Glover left Rockhampton, he went to Western Australia, where in fact he had come from originally, and he worked for the Stirling City Council, an inner city Perth council, for a number of years. But then he was appointed as the commissioner for the water commissioner for Western Australia. In Western Australia, the state government runs all of the urban water supplies across the whole state. And he told me, and I maintained contact with him for many, many years after, that when the state election was on, he would analyse the policy proposals of the government of the day and of the opposition and anybody else, and he would prepare how he would seek to respond to those policy proposals for whomever got elected. And the government changed at one point when he was there. And an expectation was that all of the CEOs of all of the statutory bodies were going to be have their heads taken off, because that was increasingly par for the course then, and is now. And he went to the newly appointed minister, and he presented the minister with, these were your policy statements at election. Here's how we can look to achieve those and promote those for you. And the minister was incredibly pleasantly surprised, because he was either led to believe or expected that the commissioner was a lackey to the previous state government, and he would have every reason to want to deny the new minister and the new government what they wanted to achieve. And yet he was forearmed and ready, and he put in front of the minister what he wanted to do and demonstrated he was a professional. And he succeeded, and he stayed in that role until he ultimately retired. And I think there's a good learning in that.
Indeed.
For CEOs in councils here in Queensland. You have a mayoral contest and you have councillor contests. Be smart about what's being put on the table, and come an election outcome, you are ready to actually talk to the new mayor or the returned mayor, whoever it is that is in the leadership role, to sort of say, well, here's how I think we could proceed with what you have sought to deliver here. And that is a pretty potent demonstration to the newly elected mayor that you've been paying attention. What may have been has changed, and here's your aspirations. This is how I can seek to help you achieve it. I think that's one way to try to build the relationship between incumbent CEO and new mayor that we could all learn from.
That's very good advice.
Yeah. So if there's anything that that we as individuals can do, or the LGMA can do, is look to sort of say, well, we know we want to build that relationship. Well, what's the means by which we can do it? And it's not just, I'm a good bloke, Mr. Mayor, and shake hands, and I can play golf with you, or we can go off to the conference together, or whatever. You've got to start the relationship on the basis of I'm here to help you achieve what you want to achieve. If I look back to the people that have helped me most, it was that messaging from Jim Glover that set the scene for how I seek to approach what I do now. And in conversations with councillors and with CEOs and through the consulting work I do, have suggested to them that come the 2020 election, if history is any guide, there'll be a 50% turnover at least in mayors, same number of councillors. Consequence of that could see 50%, or in the case of the last few years, even more over the turnover in CEOs. Then let's see if we can't put a brake on that and maybe reverse it by having the current CEOs who will confront that change at election time actually be prepared for it, is how they might do it.
Fantastic.
Very good. That's a good way to end.
Yes,
Very good chat, very insightful, and answered a lot of questions without me even asking them. And congratulations on a great career.
Thanks, Ian. It's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.